Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so this time I'm googling this one. Okay, so installing, and you have downloaded this one. And when you are installing, right? So here you will see something like this: install Python on 3.9 etc etc. Okay. So at that time, what you need to do is you need to click these two things. Okay, you need to click at least this: add Python 3.9 to path. You need to click this checkbox. So this is what you are missing.
Okay, okay.
Got it?
We'll check
Maybe
it. Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So you can do it. Maybe you can do it now also. Can you do it now? Otherwise, just uninstall everything and install. So initial, as we said, initial session. Yeah, we'll go very slowly so that everyone will understand. Once once you get hands on, right, then we can go a bit fast. Otherwise, at starting stages only, if you're not good, right, then upcoming sessions will become difficulty. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Just give me 5 minutes. I will try it and will let you know.
Or maybe you can share your screen. I'll see here.
Okay, actually, I'm joining. I have joined from
Mobile,
my mobile, but
okay, fine, right. Okay, then you can do it later. And maybe it is not at all recommended to join from mobile. Okay, whenever you are doing right, so try to do in the session itself. So I'll be asking you to execute, right? So some basic things at the time mobile, right? It's not easy. It's not handy. So if you want to listen to the class and if you want to practice in the class itself, right? Then try to log in from PC only. Okay. So yesterday we discussed these things, right? So and cross check all these typecasting functions. And so Python is what? Object oriented programming, and in Python everything is object. Python everything is object. So everything in the sense, maybe it's a variable name, class name, function name, right? So everything in Python is object. Now see here, try to understand this: what is object and what is your identifier name. So if you see this here, when I'm assigning some variable, yesterday you were seeing, right, some a equal to 20 or 10, something like that. When I'm assigning, let a will be your identifier. A is your identifier, and whereas 10, whatever the value you are assigning, that is object. That is object. So that means, okay, yeah, just hold on. You're seeing my screen, is it? Right now I'm in Python interpreter.
yeah, yeah, we can see your screen.
So here, A, what we call it as identifier. 10 is what? 10 is object. 10 is object. So what and all functions we have seen yesterday till now? We have a function called type. We have a function called type. So what it will return? It will return what is the type of this variable. And there is another function called ID. Maybe note it down, right? ID. What it will give you is, it will give you the address of this variable. It will give you the address of this object. So 10, where it got stored. So at this address, this 10 got stored. Okay. So another function ID, type and ID. Only two functions we have seen till now, right? And one more thing, just to clarify, whenever I'm teaching, I'm using this Python interpreter. So, but it is not at all recommended to use Python interpreter for each and everything. Try to write down and program and execute it. Okay. So for this also, just to check type on, just to check ID, any basic things also, open a notepad, write down a program and execute it. That's how you have to do. Okay. So that will increase your practice. So just for my convenience here, I'm using this interpreter. It is not at all recommended. Okay, so because if we write each and every program, then we can't complete our session. Okay, so just because I'm using this, don't use it. Maybe for quick things only you have to check this Python interpreter, but always you have to write down a program for each and everything. And from day one, whatever the programs we are discussing, try to make it as a proper notes. Okay, so maybe create a proper folders for when and all what and all chapters we are discussing, right? So once we start our strings, make a folder for string and add your all exercises and practice programs into that folders. Basics, so create a folder called basics or something like that, and add all your programs, so store all your programs there. Okay, so that in future it is easy for you to refer. Otherwise if you don't make it properly, right, then it after 1 month or so, right, so again you need to google so many things. Otherwise if you make it proper, if you arrange it properly, right, then it is very very easy for you. And whenever you are saving your program, also give proper name, so that see end of our course, right, you will be having some hundreds of programs. So whenever you want to check something, if you are giving proper name to your program, right, then you can quickly open that program and see. Otherwise you have to search all 100 programs. Okay, so now onwards this I'll tell in each and every batch. Okay, so in the very beginning of our session only. So try to make a habit of that. Try to make a notes properly. Try to arrange your programs, practice programs properly for your future reference. Not now, right? So maybe after 1 year or 2 years, if you want to change your job or something, right? So at that time again you need to start from the scratch. If you arrange your programs, if you arrange your notes properly, right, maybe after 2 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, right, at that time it will make your life very very simple. Instead of starting from the scratch again, it is easy for you to quickly you can refer. Okay, so there is another function called id. What it will return? Id will return the address where this object got stored. So in this thing, what is object and what is identifier? A is identifier, 10 is object. Remember this. A is identifier, 10 is object. So when I'm saying p equal to 20, here b is identifier and 20 is object. So when I'm creating a string, s equal to some Python. Okay, s is identifier and Python is your object. Okay. Now if I ask what is the address of s, it will give something, and address of p, it will give some other address. Okay, so id function will return you the address. Okay, so generally we may not be using this id function, just but for our class check, for our practice purpose, we use this id function. Okay, otherwise in general we may not be using this id function in our day to day programming. Just for learning purpose we need it, right? Now, so this is what is object and what is name. So here the very very important concept for interviews is mutability and immutability. Interviews and as well as your written test, and for your understanding. Okay, so what is mutable and immutable? The name itself says mutability means which can be changed, immutable means cannot be changed. Maybe quickly note it down. Mutable, which can be changed. Immutable means which cannot be changed. So we have some data types, right? Yesterday we listed out. So out of those data types, some of the data types are mutable, some of the data types are immutable. So for interview purpose, basically, if you are fresher, right? At least if you are fresher or 1 or 2+ years of experience, up to 3 years experience, right? So you should know these things very clearly. So there are high chances are there to ask interview questions, to get these interview questions. And also this, you have to understand this concept very very clearly. Okay? Mutability and immutability. And also you need to remember what and all data types are mutable, what and all data types are immutable. You should be very strong in these basics. Okay, next. So immutable means what? All basic data types are immutable. All basic data types are all fundamental data types are immutable. That means integer, float and string. Forget about complex type. Okay, so all fundamental data types are immutable. That means once we create an object, try to understand this second line properly. Once we create an object, we cannot do any changes to that object. That means, see here, what I am doing here, I am creating an object here. So 10 is my object. So once you create this object, 10 is of type what? Integer. And integer is what? Fundamental data type or basic data types, right? Integer, float, and string. These three are, and also boolean. These are fundamental data types, and these fundamental data types are what? Immutable. Immutables. So once we create this object, we cannot do any changes to this object. We cannot do any changes to this object. So if we try to do any changes, if we try to do any changes, with those changes, a new object will be created. Note it down. Once I explain, it is very simple. Okay. Immutability. So all fundamental data types or basic data types are immutable. Once we create an object, we cannot do any changes to that object. If we try to do any changes, with those changes, a new object will be created.
Yeah, and meanwhile, sir, I reinstalled that Python, and as
Hmm.
you showed, I selected that path also, and
Hmm.
now it's working. Yeah,
Correct.
thank you, sir.
Good. Done. Noted. Now see, what does it mean? Now I created an object called 10, and what is the identifier for 10? It is A, right? Now what is the address of this A? So address of A is some 832 okay. So what I am saying, fundamental data types 10 is integer, so these are immutable. Immutable means once we create this object, we can't do any changes to this object, right? But what happens if I do any changes to this? That means I'll do some A equal to, right, A plus some 10. I modified this object now. I modified this object. So what will happen? What we are saying, we can't do any changes to this object. That is what immutability. But I try to change this. If we try to do any changes to this, with those changes, a new object will be created. A new object will be created. Now see the address of A again. It is something different. Before doing the changes, this is 8832. After doing the changes, it is 9152. That means a new object got created. A new object got created. Okay, so understood this point. All fundamental data types are immutable. If you try to once you create, you can't do any changes to this object. If you try to do any changes to this immutable object, with those changes a new object will be created. With those changes a new object will be created. Now what is the value of A? 20. Before, what is the value of A when we created this object? Right, it is 10. And what is the address of this 10 object? 8832. So 10 is integer. Integer means immutable. So it cannot be changed. You can't do any changes to this object, which is located at 8832. If you try to do any changes to this object, what will happen? As you can't do any changes to this object. With these changes, a new object will be created, which is 9152. Got this point?
Yes, sir.
Navya and
Yes, yes.
Madhavi, clear, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This you should understand very clearly. Okay. You know, so initially I created an object called some, this is A, and what is the value of this A? This is something some 10, right? So this object is pointing to this object. So 10 is object, right? What is the address of 10 initially? 8832. All right. So 10 is the object, and where it is located, some XX 8832. This is where it is located. So now if you try to do any changes to this object, with those changes a new object will be created altogether. A new object will be created, and now onwards A will be referring to this object. A will be referring to this object. And now what is the value of A here? What is the value of, so here is 10. Now A is referring here, and this will be dereferenced. Now A will not be pointing to this anymore. This will be dereferenced. And what is the address of this? Some XX9152. 9152. So if you see this, altogether a new object got created. Altogether a new object got created. So this is what we call it as immutability. Immutability. So that means if you say this is mutable means what? A no new object will be created. In the same place, this 10 will be replaced with 20 and the address will remain same. That is what mutable and immutable. So mutability we'll see later again when it comes, right? So for now it is immutability is clear to everyone, right? Next, so if you are clear about immutability, then there is something called object reusability. So for all those immutable objects, there is something called object reusability. Object reusability, what does it mean? So here I have A, okay, I'm creating some object called A. Now what is the address of A? Address of A will be some 8832, right? Next, what I'll do is I'll create one more object called B equal to 10, right? So for all fundamental data types or for immutable object, right? There is a concept called object reusability. Object reusability. That means this is, we are trying to create a new object. We are trying to create a new object. This object is identified as A. This object is identified as B. This object is identified as B. So for all immutable objects, right? So actually creating an object in Python is very, very costly operation. When we say this, what and all, there are so many things will be running in the background, and it is actually a costly operation. So it consumes so much of memory. In disadvantages of Python we have seen, right? So Python will consume so much of memory, and creating a object is very costly operation. There are a lot of things need to be done in the back end. For us, just we are saying A equal to 10, but Python will do so many activities in the background, and it is costly operation. So whenever we are creating multiple object with same value like this 10, here A is also having 10 and B is also having 10. Instead of creating a new object, what Python virtual machine will do is, whenever we are creating any object, first step, what Python will do is, first it will verify in the memory, is this 10 object is already created or not? Already created or not? If it is already created, then make use of this. If it is not created, then only create a new object. Whenever any object we are creating, Python virtual machine, first it will verify in the memory saying that is this object is already created or not. That means it will search in the whole memory whether this object is created or not. If it is created, then reuse it. If it is not created, then only create. Now when I'm saying b equal to 10 also, what and all things will be happening in the background? So this is immutable object. For immutable, there is a concept called object reusability. So before creating the object, so it will verify in the memory saying that whether this object is already created or not. Yes, this 10 object is already created, then make use of the same object. That means now if we ask what is the address of B, it is also 8832. 8832. Now I'll say I'll create one more, C equal to 10. Now what is the address of C? This is also same. So here we have, actually we have created three objects, right? But for fundamental data types or for immutable objects, there is a concept called object reusability. whenever we are creating any object, it will verify whether this object is already created or not. If it is created, then reuse the same object. So how we can represent here, maybe in the pictorial, right, something like this. So if you see here, both A, B, there is a typo, one is A, one is B, and another is C. Okay, so both A, all three, A, B, C, all these three things are pointing to the same object, pointing to the same object. So that what we are doing, we are saving memory. We are saving memory because Python consumes so much of memory. That is disadvantage of Python, right? If you remember in our previous sessions. And also creating object is what? Costly operation. Already one more disadvantage what we discussed, Python is slow. Execution time is very slow. Correct? So we have all those disadvantages. It consumes very much huge amount of memory, and execution time is very high, right? And creating object is costly operation. To avoid all these things, there is a concept called object reusability. So for all immutable objects, so if the object is already created, first it will try to reuse the same object. If you try to reuse the same object, let me draw here, right? So what and all I'm doing here, I'm saying a equal to 10, b equal to 10, c equal to 10. Okay? So how it will be represented? So first, when I'm saying in first line a equal to 10, first it will search in the memory, is there this object is already created or not? It is not created. First it will search. So it is not created, then only it will create the object, right? So now object will be created, and now onwards this object will be referenced with what? It will be referenced with a. This is in first. In second step, I'm saying b equal to 10. So what and all will be happening in the background? Python virtual machine will verify whether this 10 object is already created or not. Yes, it is already created. Then reuse the same object. That means now b also will be referenced with, sorry, 10 also will be referenced as b. Now both a and b are same. But for both a and b are same. Now next line, c equal to 10 I'm saying. So again, in the background, it will verify is there any 10 object is already created or not. Yes, it is created. So then don't create a new object. Then just make use of same object, right? So this is how it will be. Next, what is another point? If there is any changes, then a new object will be created. If there is any changes to this object, a new object will be created. So that means what? Now what I'll do is, so here if you see all three, A, B, C, all are pointing to some 8832. Now what I'll do is, A, I'll modify. Now what is the address of A? Address of A will be something else. Oh, alright. Now what is the address of A? Address of A will be some new. So we try to do some changes to this object. What will happen with those changes? A new object will be created, right? So now what it looks like. Now A will be dereferenced from here. A will be dereferenced from here, and a new object will be created. A new object will be created, which is 20. It is 20, and now onwards, this will be referenced as A. This will be referenced as A. Here we are not deleting this. We are not when we are saying A equal to, when we are modifying A, right? We are not deleting this. This will be keeping as it is, but now onwards this A will be referenced as this 20. This 20 will be referenced as A. And the address, if you see here, a new object will be created. There is no change to B and C. Alright? See? That's why we can see a different address for A. Understood everyone? Is this clear? Three of you? Shraddha,
Yes.
Madhvi, and Navya.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Notes, right?
Sir, I have one doubt.
Go
Maybe
ahead.
I mean you can cover later definitely, but it came to my mind, so I thought we'll ask you. As you said, like Python is consuming so much of memory and all. So
Hmm.
likewise in Java, also if we you dealing with lots of code and all,
Hmm.
sometime memory out of stack and all errors we get. So we use that Java OPTS path wherein we mentioned that all the memory heap management, that logic. So do we have something like that in Python so that we can increase memory or
No need to do anything as a programmer because our very
okay,
first line when we learned is Python is very simple. As a programmer, we no need to do so many things.
got
So
it, got it.
Python virtual machine will itself will take care of all the memory managements. You no need to do any single step also. There is something called Python memory management module which will be keep on running in the background. So it will be taking care of that thing. And say if if your project is very big and if you're running in very less memory, right, at that time if your complete memory is occupied, at the time you can't do anything. Apart from that, if there is a memory in your hard disk, until unless, right, Python will not give you any chance of this memory corruption or memory what we call memory
Okay,
wastage or anything. Okay, so no need to do
okay, okay,
any
great.
things. Python will take care of that because Python is
Oh,
simple, easy. Okay.
okay, yeah, thank you, sir.
Yes. Okay, and this is what we call it as object reusability. Object reusability is applicable on all fundamental data types like integer, float, and string, and also boolean data types. So last point, just remember, object reusability is not applicable for complex types even though it is fundamental data type, because the way it is handled in the memory is something different. Okay, so just remember this, for object reusability is not applicable for complex data types. So other than that, integer, float, and boolean, right? For all these things, object reusability applicable. Now tell me here, right? So boolean type means what and all will be there? True and false. True and false. So when I'm saying A equal to true and B equal to false, right? Now what is the address of A? Something some 0192, and what is the address of B? Some 224, right? So now I'll be using boolean types means only two will be there. Either true or false. Boolean data type means either true or false. Only these two things will be there. Apart from these two, we don't have any other value for boolean data types. Either it is true or it is false. Now I create some c equal to also some true, and d equals to also true, and e equals to true. In this case, how many objects will be created? A, B, C, D. Yes, how many objects will be created?
Yeah, five.
Five. Huh? Just try to apply same thing to here, same
Only
diagram.
two.
Okay, okay, only
Yes,
one because value is same across all the five variables.
right. Only two objects will be created. So one object is for true, another object is for false. And for CDE, that concept called object reusability will come into picture, and only two objects will be created. That means throughout our Python project, only two objects for Boolean data type will be created. One object for true, one object for false. Throughout our complete Python project, right? So whatever is our project, so throughout the lifetime of our project, only two objects for Boolean type will be created. One is true, other is false. Got it? Now see this: A equal to 10, B equal to 20, C equal to 20, B equal to A plus 10. Now how many objects will be created here?
think only one.
Only one, huh?
One.
No, so
Only one.
it's not no two because
Only one object. 20 is another object. Only
B
two
and
objects will be
C
created.
will point to, yeah, B and C will point to one single object, and
Yes.
for D also 10 plus 10 means 20. It will again point to same object, and A is a 10. So two objects.
Okay. Two objects will be created. Correct? Understood, Navya?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, sir.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So only two objects will be created. Now what I'll do is A equal to A plus 10. After this, all these statements, how many objects are present?
Only two, sir.
Only two. How come two?
No, I think one object because
Only
now
one.
every,
Yeah. After this
yeah,
statement, what we are doing?
every variable is carrying the same value 20.
Correct? Yeah. Every variable is pointing to same object, 20. So what will happen
Yeah,
to this
yes, sir.
previous object? So idea of A is some, right? So now what will happen to this 10 object, right? So now see here. So now A is pointing to, A also points to 20. B also points to 20. C also points to 20. In this case, right? So here we are just dereferencing. Okay. So that means we are just dereferencing. All these things are pointing to what? All these things are pointing to, initially A was pointing to 10 object, correct? Initially A was pointing to 10, and C and D were pointing to 20. B, C, D were pointing to 20. Let me B, C, and D. This is B, this is C, and this is D, right? So this is not there. Okay. So what was my code initially? What I'm saying, right? So A equal to 10, B equal to 20, C to 20, D equal to 20. After these four statements, only two objects will be created. That is what we are representing in the diagram, right? Now, in the next step, what I am doing, A equal to A plus 10. So what will happen whenever Python is executing this step? Always, first Python will verify in the memory whether this object is already created or not. If it is not, then only it will create. If it is already created, then reuse of it. So now what is the value of A after computing this? The value of A will be 20, right? So now what will happen is this A will be dereferenced from here. It will be dereferenced from here, and now onwards this A will point to, it will be referenced as 20. Then what will happen to this 10 object? What will happen to this 10 object? Now if you see, no one is no one is referring to 10, correct? There is no one is referring to 10, and this is there in the memory, correct? So what will happen is, in the background there is a module called garbage collector will be running. Garbage collector is part of your Python memory management. It will be keep on running in the background. It will be verifying what and all. It will verify, is there any orphan object? That means, is there any object which is created and there is no one is pointing to that object? That means, so this 10 object is eligible for garbage collection. That means this will be deleted from the memory because there is no one is referring to this 10, right? So the moment we dereference, now no one is pointing to this 10. That means immediately it will not be deleted. Whenever that garbage collector will command, it will delete, right? Until that time this 10 object will be there. This 10 object will be present in the memory, right? But if there is no one is pointing to this, then Python virtual machine will delete this object from the memory, not immediately, after some time. whenever this term comes, right? Now see here, what is the address of A and B and C and D? All are same, all are 152. Now what I'll do is I'll create one more object called some e equal to 10. Now if you see what is the address of E here, it is 8832. If you remember, when we saw in the initial times also, the address of 10 was 8832. So after all these statements, this we have deleted, we have not referring this 10, right? So this 10 object was some orphan object, and now also if I created this 10, right, it was trying to reuse the same. That means this what will happen here. So this 10 is object is still present in the memory, this 10 object is still present in the memory, and when I assigned as E, right, then it was reusing this object because it is not yet deleted from the memory. If it is deleted, what will happen? A new address will come, a new object will be created. Understood, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes.
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 Good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Right. So just remember, complex data types, this object reusability concept is not applicable. Okay, so I'll stop here today, and what you have to do is, apart from yesterday's write down the program for all arithmetic operations. And next, so I've shown the example only for integer data types. So you are saying all fundamental data types are immutable, right? So take for float and string type also, and try to play with these things. So try to create multiple objects and try to modify those objects and try to print the address, and try to understand how it is behaving. So whatever the steps you are following, how many times you are creating your object, right? So that object reusability concept will come. So in this, how many objects we have? After all these things, we have only two objects. One is 10 and another is 20. Got it? So
Correct.
how you can check a new object is created or not? By checking the memory. So how to check the memory? With the help of ID function. Okay.
Okay. Sir, I
Yes.
have
Yes.
one small doubt.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm having a plan that I will use the same my Notepad Python file for all
Okay.
this exercise, but I want to segregate these sections with some comments. Okay, so how we can add a comment in a Python file? I mean, usually in Java we add that forward slashes,
Correct.
sorry, backward
Use,
slash. So,
yeah,
okay,
use
it's a
this.
hash.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah,
So
got
there
it.
are other ways also there to comment out. We'll see. So for now, just use this. Okay.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Right. Bye for today.